On Parking in Seattle by Andrew Briggs. This survey study, conducted with frequent users of parking payment terminals in Seattle, seeks to evaluate the scalability of motivational survey results, to contextualize pain points identified in the previous studies, and to assess the popularity of proposed solutions. Further, it will broaden the scope of inquiry to include differences in the target user group and the applicability of design affordances thereto. Finally, it will seek to integrate feedback across all three studies to propose data-driven recommendations for a single parking system that best suits the needs of the target population. Succinctly put, we will ask, how does the design of the parking payment system help or hinder the broad corpus of frequent users in their parking experience? Moreover, what consensus or consensuses exist within the community about the parking experience? In this light, what parking payment system will best serve frequent users in the city of Seattle and beyond? In the observational portion of this research, I identified three key points in the parking process at which users were hindered: signage and wayfinding, use of the parking payment credit card terminal, and the use of the proof of purchase printer. The interview portion of this research confirmed these pain points and suggested that users were motivated in their dissatisfaction by a lack of attention to their core user values, payment speed, and experiential consistency. Users also expressed dissatisfaction with the centralized parking concept implemented in Seattle. Next, we will assess the scope of applicability for these results and the nuances of their application across a diverse user population. The most frequent users of the parking system are those who regularly use a car when consuming entertainment, food, or local goods and services. It's on these regular leisure users of the parking system that this study will focus, because of the disproportionate effect of parking affordances on the population. The ideal participant in this study parks often in their neighborhood shopping district when consuming goods or services, or in a local business and entertainment district on a regular basis. In order to fulfill these requirements, included participants must be ordinarily resident in Seattle, must have access to a car, and must use it for leisure purposes, parking in a metered parking area and paying for parking at least 4 times per month. I received 30 responses to my survey, of which 22 met my inclusion criteria. This reflects my effort in precisely targeting this survey online. This study was carried out using an online survey propagated by social media on the Facebook platform. Participants were targeted on the platform for car ownership and residency in Seattle, and were then screened for frequency of parking use. The survey was hosted on a Google form, which was aliased to an official UW web address to enhance credibility. In this study, we will ask, when are users aided in their goals by the parking system? When are they hindered in their goals by the system? What do frequent users expect from a parking payment system, and why? What goals do users have for the parking payment process? And what differences exist between frequent parking users in terms of motivation, expectation, and goals? What consensuses unite them? Does the current payment system meet the needs of frequent users? And what system would best serve frequent parking users? Now to results. Our first label seeks to confirm the status of time minimization as the primary motivator for frequent parking payment users. We asked users to rank a number of affordances in the parking payment process by their importance to the overall experience. These were task duration or time consistency, consistency of experience, clarity of instructions, ease of physical interface use, and availability of parking convenient to payment terminals. The results are displayed here, with preferences from first to fifth on the x-axis, left to right, compared with number of responses in each category. The colored area corresponding to each affordance represents that affordance's share of the response for each preference number, from first to fifth. The results are displayed here. Users expressed an overwhelming prioritization favoring time minimization in the first preferences, and a small share of second preferences, while receiving no last preferences. This clearly demonstrates the premium valuation that users put on their time over other significant factors. When looking at all facets of the parking experience, we see a similar picture emerge. We asked users to rate their satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10, with 4 different parts of the parking payment process: use of the interface, finding the meter, card payment, and travel time to and from the meter. Then we asked them to estimate how many extra minutes they believed they spent completing each facet above reasonable completion time. The responses are graphed here with average satisfaction on the y-axis, average extra time reported on the x-axis, and each facet represented by a plus. We found a strong negative correlation between satisfaction and the time-based metric, which suggests a firm link between facet efficiency and user satisfaction. In our long response sections, users were equally clear about their values with regard to time. 12 of the 18 included respondents mentioned time as a motivating factor in their free response, and some of their quotes have been reproduced here. Responses referencing time were recorded across questions, and sometimes repeated multiple times, underscoring the pervasiveness of the high valuation. So what does this mean? Users place a significant premium on their time, prioritizing it above other user experience factors. In addition to a strong positive affinity with time minimization, waste of user time through system inefficiency contributes substantially to dissatisfaction with the current parking payment process across the system. The largely negative evaluation of facet performance points to a consensus that the current parking system does not appropriately value user time. So, in order to fulfill users' needs, a parking payment system needs above all to be fast and seamless. To address these concerns, I recommend a redesign of the parking payment interface with a view towards minimizing disruption to user activity, replacement of the one per block centralized meters with individual meters to cut down on time spent in transit to the meter, and replacement of card payment terminals. These changes will substantially improve efficiency and enhance satisfaction across the process. I've drawn a picture of what such a parking interface might look like. Our second label identifies a schism in the community studied by this research, frequent parking payment users in Seattle. At the beginning of our research, we defined frequent parking users as people who paid for public parking at least 4 times in a representative month. In this survey, we asked users to report more precisely how often they used parking payment terminals. Based on these results, we split user groups into 2 parts. Frequent parking payment users who use the system between 4 and 9 times per month, and very frequent parking users who use the system more than 9 times per month. We then coded responses on these lines looking for consensuses and divergences in the 2 groups. We found there was a significant disparity in overall satisfaction between the groups. This table shows responses coded in the manner described, indicating overall satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 10, while frequent parking payment users rated their satisfaction as a 5 of 10. Very frequent parking users rated theirs at just a 3 of 10, a sizable drop. To determine why the groups displayed such a stark disparity, we broke down self-described motivation for parking along the same lines. Participants were asked to give examples of why they generally used street parking. In other words, what causes them to park where they park. Their free response answers were very different between the 2 groups. Those identified as frequent users gave responses similar to those at left, centering around dining, leisure activities with friends, or shopping for pleasure. Meanwhile, very frequent users predominantly described necessity tasks like supermarket shopping or running errands, the obligations of life. The use motivation gap is reflected in the diverging values of these groups as well. 2 of the particularly disparate topics identified in long responses were parking portability and disruption. Very frequent parking users mentioned portability of parking rates at almost 60%, while frequent parking users hardly mentioned it at all. By contrast, frequent parking users often emphasize disruption of their tasks more than very frequent users. So what does this mean? In our previous work with the frequent parking payment community, we had assumed that the frequent parking payment community was a homogeneous space, given their shared motivation and geographic experience. Turns out that this isn't the case. Frequent users and very frequent users share much in common. Many, if not most, of the questions in the survey were answered similarly by both groups. Yet the use motivation and thus the values that they bring to the parking experience are slightly different. Very frequent users are looking for different things than frequent users. Given the disparity in satisfaction, these differences clearly have considerable bearing on their perception of the current system and on system efficacy. The current parking system works better for frequent parking users than for very frequent users, which is crucial information when designing a departure from the system. And a new parking payment system must design with both user groups in mind, but particularly towards improving the experience for very frequent users. To address these concerns, I recommend design-specific affordances in the parking system for both frequent users and very frequent users to minimize the system's impact on these groups individually while retaining the importance of time minimization as a shared value. These affordances should be targeted specifically to the user groups based on diverging usage motivation. Finally, I recommend further research into the relative impact of the parking system on the groups to better understand how to best serve their needs. I've drawn an example picture of a shared affordance of these groups, which offers a shared which offers the seamless, non-disruptive tap-to-pay parking model for frequent users and a portable pay-once, use-often pass printer for very frequent users. Our final label looks towards a proposed solution to the parking payment process. In the observational and interview study, we proposed that an individual meter at each parking space would better serve the community of frequent parking users. In this study, we asked frequent users how they felt about the change, whether they supported it or not. An overwhelming majority, 72%, said that they supported it. This clearly points to a consensus around the dissatisfaction with the current system and its need for comprehensive replacement by a decentralized parking model. To understand the system's popularity, we looked to the ranking of user priorities. In our interview study, we determined that users were likely to support decentralized parking solutions if they were dissatisfied with the time it took to pay and the consistency of the system. In this graph of preferences from 1 to 5, organized by share of responses in each prioritization, we see that our results were representative. Time is far and away the most important to users, leading in first preferences by a wide majority and no last preferences. Consistency in the process is a strong second, receiving the plurality of second preferences, and a significant share of first preferences as well. Together, time and consistency received more than 75% of first and second preferences. When asked about satisfaction with various facets of the current parking payment system on a scale of 1 to 10, users are equally unequivocal. Location of payment machines is the least satisfying facet of the current system, scoring an average of just 2.3 out of 10. The process of parking payment is almost as unpopular, scoring a 2.7 out of 10. That's for specific card media payments. These facets are the most affected by the redesign, suggesting both a fundamental dissatisfaction with the current system and broad support for the design priorities of the proposed system. So what does this mean? Decentralized parking is incredibly popular and is perceived as an improvement over the current system. Users far and away pick the proposed solution over the current parking payment system, suggesting that the proposed parking payment process integrates more efficaciously with their lives. The proposed solution also prioritizes factors that are important to users, like time minimization and consistency. Given that the facets related to these values are ranked lowest, it's clear that the lack of attention to these values has a deleterious effect on user experience. By correcting this, the new system is likely to produce tangible positive impact for users. In brief, A move to decentralized parking addresses the primary concerns of users and would improve the experience and outcome. To address these concerns, I am pleased to recommend the implementation of decentralized parking as the basis of a new parking system in Seattle. The change should focus on affordances that address core user concerns of time, consistency, and convenience, and address the myriad minor deficiencies in previous designs. I've sketched an artist's conception of what such a meter might look like. Next steps. Based on the results and recommendations, additional research is necessary to determine specific affordances for minimization of time and impact on users, and to explore the relationship between frequent and very frequent parking users. While this research touched on both those points, we're still not sure quite how users will respond to specific affordances, and we don't know a lot about what makes frequent and very frequent parking users different. This research will enable specific and efficacious implementation of user concerns while enhancing precise targeting of affordances. In my next research study, I would focus less on free response questions and include more multiple choice questions to assess user sentiment. The limitations of this study are its limited sample size and its focus on a diverse user group, which would benefit from refinement. The hardest part of the survey was determining how to analyze the data received in an efficacious manner. I was surprised that my survey study garnered so many responses and that the responses had such a high rate of inclusion. And it was really fun to come up with questions that comprehensively covered this diverse topic.